The arrest had been a case of mistaken identity, but when Federal Prosecutor Angela Davis found herself in handcuffs in Judge Morrison's courtroom, she decided to let the process play out. She wanted to see exactly how the system treated a black woman accused of a crime. What she witnessed would shock her, and ultimately cost Judge Morrison his career. Angela Davis had been walking to her car in the courthouse parking garage when it happened. She just finished prosecuting a high-profile federal case involving government corruption, and it was past 9 p.m. when she finally left the building. The garage was dimly lit, with several security cameras that hadn't worked in months, a fact that would prove crucial to what happened next. As Angela approached her silver Honda Accord, she noticed another woman of similar build walking toward an identical car 2 spaces away. Both women were black, both wore dark business suits, both carried leather briefcases. In the poor lighting from a distance, they could easily be mistaken for each other. The other woman was Denise Williams, a accounting clerk who had been embezzling money from her employer for the past 6 months. Federal agents had been tracking her for weeks, and tonight they'd finally gathered enough evidence to make an arrest. They were waiting in the garage, watching for Denise to leave the building where she worked as a night shift cleaner to supplement her day job. What happened next was a perfect storm of poor communication, inadequate lighting, and split-second decision-making. As Angela unlocked her car, she heard heavy footsteps approaching rapidly. Before she could turn around, strong hands grabbed her arm. "Angela Davis, you're under arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud," the federal agent announced, cuffing her hands behind her back. "I think there's been a mistake," Angela said calmly, though her heart was racing. "I'm Federal Prosecutor Angela Davis. I work in this building." The arresting agent, Special Agent Marcus Thompson, barely glanced at her face. He was focused on executing the arrest warrant, and the description matched. Black female, 5'6", dark business suit, silver Honda Accord. In the dim garage lighting, and with the stress of the operation, he didn't take time to really look at who he was arresting. "Save it for the judge," Agent Thompson said dismissively. "We've been watching you for weeks." Angela realized what had happened. They were looking for someone else, someone who looked like her. She tried to explain, but the agents weren't listening. They were already radioing in that the arrest had been made successfully. As they led her away, Angela caught a glimpse of another woman being arrested near an identical car just a few spaces away. That had to be the real target. But by then, Angela was already in the back of an FBI vehicle, her words falling on deaf ears. During the ride to the courthouse, Angela made a decision that would change everything. Instead of demanding her immediate release, instead of pulling rank or making phone calls, she decided to experience the system from the other side. She wanted to see exactly how a black woman accused of a crime was treated by the very system she'd devoted her career to serving. Angela had spent 15 years as a federal prosecutor, handling everything from white-collar crime to organized crime cases. She'd won major convictions, earned respect from her colleagues, and built a reputation as one of the most skilled attorneys in the federal system. But she'd never seen that system from the defendant's perspective. She'd always wondered if the stories she heard from defense attorneys were true, stories about bias, about presumptions of guilt, about how differently defendants were treated based on their race and appearance. Tonight, she would find out firsthand. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just hours earlier, she'd been arguing a case before Judge Morrison, the same judge who would now be presiding over her arraignment. Judge Harrison Morrison was known for his tough-on-crime approach and his impatience with what he considered excuses from defendants. Angela had appeared before Morrison dozens of times as a prosecutor. She knew his tendencies, his biases, his habit of making snap judgments about people based on their appearance, and the charges against them. She'd seen him treat white-collar defendants, mostly white and well-dressed, with courtesy and respect, while showing obvious disdain for street-level defendants who were predominantly black and brown. Now she would experience Morrison's courtroom from the other side of the bench. The processing took 3 hours. Angela was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell with several other women awaiting arraignment. She listened to their stories, their fears, their experiences with the system. Most had been through this process multiple times. All of them were women of color. All of them expected the worst from the judge they were about to face. "You got Morrison?" asked Linda, a woman in her 40s who'd been arrested for possession with intent to distribute. "Girl, you better have a good lawyer. That man don't like us." Angela absorbed everything. The casual assumption that the judge would be hostile, the resigned acceptance of unfair treatment, the way the system ground these women down before they even set foot in the courtroom. When her turn came, Angela was led into the familiar courtroom where she'd argued countless cases. But now she was seeing it from a completely different perspective. The courtroom that had felt professional and dignified when she stood at the prosecutor's table now felt cold and intimidating from the defendant's chair. Judge Morrison entered, and Angela watched him scan the docket. When his eyes landed on her case, his expression didn't change. She was just another defendant to process. He didn't recognize her, which wasn't surprising. Prosecutors and judges interacted frequently, but usually across professional roles and formal settings. Sitting in handcuffs at the defendant's table, Angela looked like any other accused person. "Next case," the bailiff announced. "United States v. Angela Davis. Charges of embezzlement and wire fraud." Judge Morrison looked up at Angela for the first time, his gaze taking in her appearance. A black woman in handcuffs wearing a wrinkled business suit that had seen better days after hours in a holding cell. "Miss Davis," Morrison began, his tone already conveying disapproval, "you're charged with embezzling funds from your employer and using wire transfers to hide your criminal activity. This represents a serious breach of trust." Angela's court-appointed attorney, a young public defender named James Crawford, started to speak, but Morrison held up his hand. "Before we proceed," Morrison continued, looking directly at Angela, "I want you to understand the gravity of these charges. This isn't some petty theft. This is a federal crime that shows a pattern of deception and greed." Angela remained silent, watching Morrison make assumptions about her character based solely on the charges and her appearance. "People like you," Morrison said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone, "think you can take shortcuts, think the rules don't apply to you. You probably thought you were too smart to get caught." The words hit Angela like physical blows. "People like you." The phrase revealed everything about Morrison's mindset, his biases, his assumptions about who commits crimes, and why. "Your Honor," Crawford interjected, "my client maintains her innocence, and, of course, she does," Morrison interrupted with obvious irritation. "They all maintain their innocence until they're faced with the evidence. Ms. Davis, let me give you some free advice. Take responsibility for your actions. Show some remorse. It might help you when it comes time for sentence." Angela felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to remain silent. This was exactly what she'd wanted to witness, how the system treated someone who looked like her when they were accused of a crime. Morrison continued his lecture, making assumptions about Angela's background, her motivations, her character. He spoke about teaching lessons and sending messages to people who thought they could game the system. Rehook. But what Judge Morrison didn't know was that he was humiliating one of the most respected federal prosecutors in the district, someone who had prosecuted cases in his own courtroom and who was recording every biased word he said. Angela had managed to activate the voice recording app on her phone before the arraignment. The phone was in her jacket pocket, and the audio was being automatically uploaded to cloud storage. Every word of Morrison's biased lecture was being preserved as evidence. As Morrison continued his condescending speech, Angela made mental notes of every problematic statement, every assumption, every moment when his treatment of her differed from how she'd seen him treat white defendants facing similar charges. "The defendant will be held on $50,000 bail," Morrison announced, despite the fact that Angela had no criminal record and posed no flight risk. She'd seen Morrison release white-collar defendants accused of similar crimes on their own recognizing. "Your Honor," Crawford protested, "my client has no criminal history and strong ties to the community. She's not a flight risk." "Mr. Crawford," Morrison snapped, "your client is accused of stealing money. That tells me everything I need to know about her character and trustworthiness." Angela watched as Morrison set bail at an amount that would be difficult for most working people to pay, another barrier designed to keep defendants in jail whether they were guilty or not. But Angela had heard enough. It was time to end this charade. She stood up, causing both Crawford and the bailiff to look at her in surprise. "Your Honor," Angela said, her voice clear and professional, "I'd like to address the court." Morrison's expression darkened. "Miss Davis, your attorney will speak for you. Sit down." "Your Honor," Angela continued, ignoring his command, "I am Federal Prosecutor Angela Davis. I working this building. I've prosecuted cases in this very courtroom. I was arrested tonight in a case of mistaken identity." The courtroom went completely silent. Crawford's mouth fell open. The bailiff froze. Morrison stared at Angela as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. That's impossible," Morrison stammered. "You're charged with embezzlement. You were arrested by federal agents." "Yes, I was," Angela confirmed. "And instead of immediately correcting the mistake, I decided to experience the system from the defendant's perspective. I wanted to see exactly how you treat people who look like me when they're accused of crimes." Morrison's face went pale as the implications hit him. You're Federal Prosecutor Angela Davis," she confirmed. "The same Angela Davis who argued the Henderson corruption case in front of you last week. The same Angela Davis who has prosecuted dozens of cases in your courtroom over the past 5 years." Morrison looked as if he might faint. There's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's been no misunderstanding," Angela said firmly. "You've shown me exactly who you are and how you view defendants who look like me. You made assumptions about my character, my motivations and my background based solely on my race and the charges against me." Crawford was frantically whispering to someone on his phone, probably trying to verify Angela's identity. The bailiff was looking between Angela and Morrison with confusion. "Every word you said is recorded," Angela continued. "Your assumptions about people like me, your lecture about taking responsibility before you'd heard any evidence, your decision to set bail at an amount designed to keep me in jail, all of it." Morrison's hands were shaking. "Prosecutor Davis, I was just doing my job." "No, Your Honor, you were revealing your bias. In the 15 years I've appeared before you as a prosecutor, I've watched you treat white defendants accused of similar crimes with courtesy and respect. You've released them on their own recognizance, given them the benefit of the doubt, spoken to them as if they were human beings deserving of dignity." Angela gestured to the nearly empty courtroom. "But tonight, when you thought I was just another black defendant, you treated me like a criminal before hearing any evidence. You lectured me about my character, made assumptions about my motivations, and set bail designed to punish rather than ensure my appearance at trial." Morrison tried to speak, but Angela wasn't finished. "The most telling moment was when you said, 'people like you.' That phrase revealed everything about how you view black defendants in your courtroom, not as individuals deserving due process, but as representatives of a group you've already judged." By now, Crawford had confirmed Angela's identity through phone calls to the federal prosecutor's office. Other court personnel were gathering, word spreading quickly through the building that a federal prosecutor had been subjected to Judge Morrison's bias and had recorded the entire interaction. "This arraignment is invalid," Angela announced. "I demand my immediate release, and I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board first thing tomorrow morning." Morrison was now visibly panicking. "Prosecutor Davis, perhaps we can discuss this privately." "No, Your Honor, this isn't going to be handled privately. The public has a right to know how you treat defendants based on their race. The legal community needs to understand the bias that exists in this courtroom." Angela turned to Crawford. "Mr. Crawford, I assume you're recording this as well?" Crawford nodded, holding up his phone. "Every word." Angela looked back at Morrison. "Your Honor, you've provided clear evidence of judicial bias that will be reviewed by your superiors, the media, and the public. The defendants who appear before you deserve equal treatment under the law, regardless of their race or background." As Angela was uncuffed and released, Morrison sat in stunned silence, realizing that his career was effectively over. The bailiff, the court reporter, and several attorneys who had gathered to witness the spectacle were already making phone calls and sending messages. Final rehook. Because sometimes the person you judge and dismiss based on their appearance is the one with the power to expose the very bias that's been hiding in plain sight for years. Within hours, the story broke across local and national news. Federal prosecutor exposes judge's racial bias after mistaken arrest became the headline that ended Judge Morrison's 20-year career. The recording Angela had made was played on every major news network. Legal experts analyzed Morrison's statements, pointing out the clear evidence of racial bias in his treatment of defendants. Civil rights organizations demanded investigations into other cases Morrison had handled. Angela's experience sparked a broader conversation about bias in the criminal justice system. Law schools began using her case as a teaching tool about implicit bias and equal treatment under the law. The Judicial Conduct Board implemented new training requirements for judges about recognizing and addressing their own biases. Judge Morrison was forced to resign within a week. An investigation revealed a pattern of disparate treatment for defendants of different races that dated back years. Dozens of cases he'd handled were reviewed, and several convictions were overturned due to evidence of bias. The real embezzler, Denise Williams, was arrested the same night in the parking garage. She pleaded guilty and received a sentence far more lenient than what Morrison had seemed prepared to impose on Angela based solely on assumptions. Angela returned to her work as a federal prosecutor with a new perspective on the system she'd devoted her career to serving. She began advocating for reforms designed to reduce bias and ensure equal treatment for all defendants, regardless of race or background. Her experience also led to practical changes in how mistaken identity arrests were handled. New protocols required officers to verify identity more thoroughly before making arrests, and defendants were given more opportunities to prove their identity before being processed through the system. Most importantly, Angela's case became a powerful example of how bias operates in the criminal justice system, often invisibly, but with devastating consequences for those subjected to it. Judge Morrison's replacement, Judge Maria Rodriguez, implemented new courtroom procedures designed to ensure equal treatment for all defendants. She required that all proceedings be recorded and regularly reviewed for signs of bias. Angela often thought about that night in the parking garage and the decision she'd made to let the mistaken arrest proceed. It had cost her a night in jail and several hours of humiliation, but it had exposed a truth that needed to be seen. The criminal justice system was supposed to be blind to race, class, and background. But as Angela's experience proved, too often it saw exactly what it wanted to see, and made judgments based on prejudice rather than evidence. Her case became a reminder that justice requires constant vigilance, not just from those who enforce the law, but from those who have the courage to expose injustice when they see it. Angela Davis had always been a prosecutor seeking justice. After that night, she became something more, a voice for those who are judged before they ever get a chance to tell their story. And sometimes, it takes someone with power experiencing powerlessness to truly understand what justice means. The system that had tried to judge Angela Davis based on her appearance instead revealed its own character, and that character was found wanting. Justice, it turned out, was only as blind as the people who administered it chose to be. 6 months after that night in the courthouse, Angela Davis stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Law School, delivering a keynote address on judicial bias and criminal justice reform. The case that had begun with a mistaken arrest had evolved into a movement that was reshaping how the legal system approached issues of race and fairness. That night in Judge Morrison's courtroom, Angela told the audience of law students, professors, and legal professionals, "I learned that the system I had devoted my career to serving was capable of profound injustice. But I also learned that sometimes it takes experiencing injustice personally to find the courage to fight it systemically." The Harvard invitation was just one of dozens Angela had received since her story went viral. She had testified before Congress about judicial bias, consulted with law enforcement agencies about arrest procedures, and worked with civil rights organizations to develop new training programs for judges and prosecutors. The impact of her case extended far beyond Judge Morrison's resignation. The Department of Justice had launched a comprehensive review of judicial conduct complaints, leading to several additional resignations and reforms. Law schools across the country now required courses on implicit bias as part of their curriculum, but perhaps the most meaningful change came from an unexpected source. Marcus Thompson, the FBI agent who had arrested Angela that night, requested a meeting with her 3 months after the incident. "Miss Davis," he said as they sat in Angela's office, "I owe you more than an apology. I made assumptions that night based on incomplete information and poor lighting. But if I'm honest, I also made assumptions based on unconscious bias." Angela studied the agent's face, seeing genuine remorse and a desire to do better. "Agent Thompson, what matters now is what we do with this experience." "I've been thinking about that," Thompson replied. "I want to help train other agents to avoid the mistakes I made. I want to be part of the solution." That conversation led to Thompson becoming one of the FBI's most effective trainers on avoiding bias in arrests and investigations. He and Angela co-developed a training program that was eventually adopted by federal law enforcement agencies nationwide. The program focused on real-world scenarios like the parking garage incident, teaching agents to slow down, verify facts, and examine their own assumptions before taking action. It became a model for how law enforcement could acknowledge past mistakes and commit to doing better. Angela's relationship with her former colleagues in the prosecutor's office had also evolved. Initially, some had been uncomfortable with her decision to expose the judicial bias so publicly. They worried it might undermine confidence in the entire system. But that's exactly why it needed to be exposed, Angela explained to a gathering of federal prosecutors. "We took an oath to seek justice, not to protect a system that wasn't working fairly for everyone." Her words resonated with younger prosecutors especially, many of whom had witnessed similar bias, but hadn't known how to address it. Angela became a mentor to these attorneys, helping them navigate the complex challenge of working within a system while also working to reform it. The case also had a personal impact on Angela that she hadn't anticipated. Reading letters from defendants who had appeared before Judge Morrison over the years, she realized how many people had been affected by his bias. Many had received harsher sentences than they might have with a different judge. Some had been denied bail unnecessarily. Others had been treated with a disrespect that had added to their trauma. One letter particularly moved. It was from Maria Santos, a woman who had appeared before Morrison 5 years earlier on a drug possession charge. "Ms. Davis," Maria wrote, "I want to thank you for what you did. When I stood in that courtroom, Judge Morrison looked at me like I was garbage. He called me a typical drug user and said I would probably never amount to anything. His words stayed with me for years, making me believe I was worthless." Maria went on to explain how she had overcome her addiction, earned her GED, and was now working as a counselor helping other women in recovery. "I wish I had known then that his words said more about him than they did about me. Your story helped me realize that." Reading letters like Maria's reinforced for Angela why her decision to expose Morrison's bias had been necessary. The harm caused by biased judges extended far beyond the courtroom. It affected how people saw themselves and their potential for redemption. Angela also learned that her case had international implications. Legal systems around the world were examining their own practices for evidence of bias. The recording of Morrison's comments had been translated into multiple languages and was being used in legal reform discussions from Europe to Africa. "What happened in that Chicago courtroom?" a law professor from Oxford University told Angela during a video conference, "has started conversations about fairness and bias in legal systems globally. Your courage to expose that bias has had ripple effects you probably never imagined." As Angela reflected on the 6 months since her arrest, she realized that the most important outcome wasn't Judge Morrison's resignation or the policy changes or even the international attention. It was the reminder that justice required constant vigilance from those who had the power to demand it. Her experience had taught her that sometimes the greatest service you can perform for justice is to put yourself at risk to protect it. That night in the courthouse, she could have demanded immediate release, could have used her position to avoid the humiliation and bias she experienced. Instead, she chose to be a witness to injustice so that others might be spared from it. The criminal justice system wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But it could be better. fairer, more just, if people were willing to acknowledge its flaws and work to fix them. Angela Davis had always been a prosecutor seeking justice. After that night, she became something more, a voice for those who are judged before they ever get a chance to tell their story. The system that had tried to judge Angela Davis based on her appearance instead revealed its own character, and that character was found wanting. Justice, it turned out, was only as blind as the people who administered it chose to be.